World War II was a war of traps, both literal and metaphorical, where the ground beneath soldiers' feet and the information they relied upon could be as deadly as any bullet. Common perceptions of these traps paint them as simple tools of warfare, hidden explosives, or basic pitfalls. But this barely scratches the surface of a much more complex and strategic aspect of the conflict. The traps of World War II were masterpieces of engineering and psychology, designed not only to inflict physical harm, but to demoralize the enemy, disrupt operations, and deceive high command. From the deserts of North Africa to the dense forests of the Ardennes, the Allies and Axis powers alike employed traps that could be as elaborate as a fake army, complete with inflatable tanks, or as sinister as a seemingly abandoned piece of equipment rigged to explode upon inspection. Anti-tank mines were a tank crew's worst fear. These hidden weapons could easily tear apart a tank impervious to most other weapons. Even the heavily armored Churchill and Tiger tanks could be destroyed or disabled if one of these powerful mines detonated under the thinly armored belly of the tank. They were specially designed only to detonate if a large amount of pressure was applied, meaning infantry and light vehicles such as jeeps would not detonate them. The Topf mine was a particularly feared anti-tank mine. It was designed to use as little metal as possible, making it almost impossible to detect with the Allied metal detectors. Made from compressed wood pulp, cardboard, tar, and glass, the only metal component was the detonator. In order to allow other Axis forces to detect these mines, they were coated in tarn sand. This seemingly innocuous sand was highly radioactive, which was picked up by the Geiger counters fitted to German metal detectors. Without rummaging through the dirt by hand, these mines were almost undetectable. Satchel charges were used as makeshift anti-tank weapons. They were carried by combat engineers and intended to be used to demolish fortifications or buildings. Packed with TNT, they were unable to penetrate the armor of most tanks, but, if placed correctly, they could blow off the tracks, totally immobilizing the vehicle, allowing it to be hit with an anti-tank gun or swarmed by infantry. One of the most effective AT mines was the Holsprung 4672. This was one of the most powerful mines of the war. It used a shaped charge to penetrate deep into the armor and was capable of penetrating 100 millimeters of armored steel. For comparison, the ubiquitous Sherman had only 25 millimeters of belly armor. The British ST grenade, or sticky bomb, was a rather unique weapon, devised after the British evacuation of Dunkirk, when it had lost most of its tanks and anti-tank weaponry. Looking like a giant lollipop, the warhead was coated in a highly sticky substance, so it would stick when thrown or placed on the side of a tank. They were effective against the lightly armored Italian tanks of the North Africa campaign, but not many were supplied to the regular army. Most were supplied to the Home Guard. One former Home Guard member recalls a training session where another man accidentally stuck the bomb to his own trousers. Anti-personnel mines. Every soldier greatly feared anti-personnel mines. Even more frightening was discovering you'd walked into the middle of a minefield. These weapons were capable of killing those who trod on them and severely injuring those nearby within the blast area. They were buried under a few inches of dirt to disguise them from the advancing enemy troops, and much scientific research was undertaken to find new, better ways to locate these mines. These mines were used both defensively and offensively. A densely packed minefield acted like a strong fortification, preventing soldiers from advancing without having first cleared a breach for entry. They could also be used to force enemies to travel a specific route, where soldiers would be lying in ambush. Many men lost their lives or limbs to mines. One infamous mine of World War II is the German S-mine, known as the Bouncing Betty to the Western Allies, and the Frog mine to the Russians. This mine was designed to harm as many people as possible. When triggered, the mine, a small steel cylinder, jumped up into the air and detonated, roughly 1 to 1.5 meters in the air. The cylinder was filled with over 300 pieces of shrapnel, sometimes steel balls, but often scrap pieces of steel. The height of the explosion meant victims were usually seriously wounded in the abdomen or chest, causing severe injuries. Within 20 meters was the lethal range, though it could inflict casualties as far as 100 meters away. However, American soldiers report injuries from as far as 140 meters. Not all landmines were explosive in nature. The Soviets, Germans, and Americans all produced chemical weapon mines, which released toxic chemicals such as mustard gas upon detonation. But these were never used in overly large numbers. Millions of mines were planted during World War II, and demining operations began immediately after the end of the war. Axis prisoners of war were used to clear known minefields, at significant risk to themselves. Tens of thousands of German prisoners were used to demine France, with almost 2,000 dying. The destruction and instability of the war meant many minefields were not adequately mapped, and mines and other unexploded ordnance still litter Europe to this day. It is estimated that there are millions still present in the deserts of Egypt, and there have been over 8,000 mine casualties in Egypt since 1982. Booby Traps. Many odd designs were produced during the war by special operations units and soldiers in the field. German saboteurs worked to design concealed bombs that could be used against civilians in Britain. These include explosive hairbrushes, tinned foods, thermos flasks, bottles of motor oil, and even chocolate bars. The explosive chocolate bars were produced specifically to cater to Winston Churchill's sweet tooth, in hopes that he could be assassinated. Soldiers in retreat often booby-trapped the areas and buildings they were fleeing. German soldiers would booby-trap those buildings likely to be used as field headquarters, such as farmhouses or cottages. One particularly devious trap relied on an enemy officer having a keen eye. A painting in a home would be put crooked and attached to a mine or grenade by a tripwire. When an observant officer went to straighten the painting, the device would detonate. The flame fougasse was an especially deadly type of mine-cum-booby trap. These were improvised and so varied in their exact design. The British Petroleum Warfare Department developed a model during the 1940 invasion crisis. A 150-liter drum of flammable liquid would be dug into the ground and attached to a fuse. They were packed with either petrol and oil or a sticky mixture of tar, lime, and petrol. These could shoot a burst of hot, sticky flame 3 meters wide and 27 meters long. Roughly 50,000 fougasse mines were placed along the southern coast of Britain, but were never used. Booby traps were also a major problem in the Pacific theater. They used many tactics similar to those of the Germans, such as attaching explosives to items American soldiers might want to take as souvenirs, such as radios or sunshades or even vegetables still growing in the ground. Sometimes the bodies of dead Japanese soldiers had grenades placed underneath them, with the pins pulled. The weight of the body held the safety lever on, but as soon as the body was disturbed, the lever would release and the grenade would detonate. Wounded men were also used to lure American troops into a deadly ambush. In the battle for Okinawa, Japan's final battle of the war, soldiers used anything they could to inflict casualties on the invading Americans. Civilians were everywhere on the island, often caught in the crossfire. American troops tried the best they could to remove them from the battlefield, bringing them behind American lines. In one instance, a group of disheveled Japanese citizens wrapped in rags and blankets strolled slowly towards the American lines, seeking refuge. The sergeant sensed something was wrong, and he and his men opened fire. These civilians were, in fact, Japanese soldiers in civilian clothes, and were hiding grenades and demolitions charges underneath their blankets. A few days later, the same men were investigating a cave. The cry of "Dete koyo" was given, meaning "come out." A soldier walked out slowly with his hands up. All of a sudden, he leapt to the ground. Behind him, a Japanese soldier dressed as a woman opened fire with his pistol. Obstacles and area denial weapons. Mass-produced and improvised obstacles were used to slow the advance of enemy infantry or prevent tanks and other vehicles from progressing. The French Maginot Line and German Atlantic Wall were both long, heavily fortified defenses made from a combination of obstacles, mines, and bunkers. One of the first obstacles encountered by the Allies on D-Day was the Hembalk. These were simply raised logs covered with metal teeth or teller mines. They lay at an angle, pointing towards the sea, and were placed in shallow waters, so as to be disguised at high tide. They were designed to destroy and tip over landing craft, but were largely ineffective. Another obstacle was the Holzpfähle, referred to by the Allies as Rommel's asparagus. Another simple method of defense. They were tall wooden stakes placed in fields where paratroopers and military gliders were expected to land. The Wehrmacht placed over 1 million of these sharpened stakes, but much like the Hembalk, they were mostly useless, with only 300 casualties attributed to them. One very effective obstacle was the Czech hedgehog. In their simplest form, they were 3 metal beams welded together in the shape of a 3-dimensional star. These were used as defenses on the beaches of Normandy in preparation for D-Day. They were very successful in blocking the progress of tanks and other vehicles, and had to be either demolished or avoided. The Czech hedgehog is still in common use today. Caltrops were another simple yet effective obstacle, made from 2 folded pieces of sharpened steel sheet. They were designed to puncture tires and disable soldiers unfortunate enough to step on them. These were perhaps one of the cheapest and simplest area-denying weapons used during the war, and they were very effective despite their incredibly crude construction. They were used by all sides and in all theaters as a cost-effective way to impede the enemy's advance. The least glamorous, yet perhaps most effective obstacle of all was the humble barbed wire. Designed to keep in livestock, it found its home on the battlefield during World War I, but was equally as prevalent in World War II. It worked to slow both infantry and vehicles. Unlike agricultural barbed wire, it was laid down in multiple rows, meaning one could not simply climb over it. It either had to be destroyed with explosives or cut with wire cutters. If attacking a fortification, combat engineers would be required to break through the barbed wire, possibly while under fire from enemy machine guns. Tanks could not simply roll over it, as the wire would wrap around the tracks, tangling the working gears and bringing the vehicle to a total standstill, possibly even blowing a track. War has always inspired technology, from technology that saves lives to that which takes them. When someone's life is at risk on the battlefield, those threatened can become incredibly ingenious in the face of potential death. Many great minds have flourished during war, working to solve or create problems often absent in a peaceful world. Do these inventions cause more suffering, or do they prevent it by helping bring those bloody wars to a quicker end?